Let's settle into what should be a very engaging conversation.
Hopefully it'll be a lively panel with such fantastic panelists that we have today. So I was going to make a quick introduction, but I think you know them very, very, very well. By many of them have spoken today. You know, Lars was talking earlier about the games that he's been developing and showing. We know our chief vampire officer of the conference here, Paul. Of course, we definitely know Sarah, who just spoke. Teresa was the first speaker yesterday, so if you were not fortunate enough to be here first thing during the conference, she was a fantastic speaker and was making what I felt was a breakdown of some games and why they were working, why maybe they were not working, they were not coherent between the learning and the engagement objectives, and that was fantastic. Michael as well opened today the day with his talk around how to break the barriers for innovation and the use basically of game-based learning in education, training, and so on. So I think you know them pretty well. I don't want to spend too much time on that. We will be taking questions from the audience. So if you think of any question, I know some questions have been happening already during some of the talks of our fellow panelists. So please feel free to bring them up. I will try to be calling you out as soon as we finish each round of explanations. And so we'll get started. I just have an initial question to sort of kick this off. And I wanted to know, what do the panelists feel is I always like to talk about what we're looking forward, because as well as Sarah was talking about what is the next thing that we're looking for, is what do you feel is the next thing for the next, and maybe Sarah is already part of that answer from her presentation, the next 5-10 years in game-based learning, gamification, simulations, etc., etc. What do you think is coming up in the next years, or what should we be pushing towards in these next years to come? So I'll leave you to the ladies first, definitely. So Sarah, if you want to start, you were just speaking. Maybe Teresa, who was first yesterday. So
okay, I know that there will be different perspectives to answer this question, and because I'm a researcher and a qualitative researcher, I think that my responsibility is to explain or to think a little bit about what should happen with research in relation to this field. I think that most studies, in order to assess the effectiveness of learning games, are mainly quantitative studies. And these quantitative studies, in general, try to assess, well, are we maybe changing the perspectives or the attitudes of users in a positive or a negative way? But in these studies, from my perspective, do not give explanations of what exactly in the game is responsible for these effects. So from my perspective, qualitative research that tries to understand better which are the perceptions of players, in which different ways they interpret the content of the games, could help us a lot to design better games that better respond to their needs and their expectations, of course.
Fantastic. What would you like to add, Sarah?
5 and 10 years. All the problems of the world will be solved in 10 years' time by games. I wish. I think there'll be... My feeling is that probably closer to 10 than 5. I think there's going to be a lot more game-based learning across the education systems. And I think that will start to move into universities in a much bigger way. I think we'll probably see quite large proportions in schools of gameplay. So I think there's, it's a complicated sort of piece of work to think about, but I think that would be where my sense is that there will be more, and it'll be much more embedded. It'll be much more considered part of our education system as a whole. So that would be my perspective.
Paul, what do you think? Or do you want to jump in?
I'm not an academic. Okay, so research for me is something that somebody does on stuff that we've already done, design. Well, what I do, when I design games, I design them based on needs. And I see two conflicting issues emerging in this generation that is going to show itself up. One is the expectation that I will be entertained. Okay? So students won't go for traditional lecture-based. They want to be entertained. They want immersive games. They want learning experiences where they're getting rewarded for participating. But then the other side of that, then, there's going to be a major problem with engagement levels, lack of engagement, unwillingness to engage. Because already I see it in a younger generation, people are just walking on phones, they're disconnected from what's happening around them. And that's showing up more and more in the workplace. People are emailing each other rather than just going and saying, hi, here's that thing you needed.
Shaking hands.
Shaking hands. But that lack of engagement or willingness to engage is going to be a big social problem in years to come. And so I think there are two conflicting things happening at the same time. I want to be entertained, but I'm not willing to go and engage with other people. If I can't send a message into an app, I won't actually go and talk to them. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for learning. And I think there's an opportunity in there then for us to use game-based learning to do with both of those. Create engagement and also create reward systems for learning.
Lars?
Yeah, thank you.
Thoughts?
Well, I'll try to answer as an organization using games and not so much from the educational sector. And I see the question nested in how we learn that is really changing these days. That so game-based learning is going to follow where learning as a whole is going, and learning and education is very much under disruption. So I think that the major pull will come from that trend, and I think that people will be expecting to be able to just pull game-based learning experiences based on their immediate needs, which will require lots of small games becoming available online. And then as a client looking into the future, it very much comes back to that we are going away from sending our staff on training and much more expecting others to help us here now with our immediate needs. So I think that trend will continue. Also, as companies are becoming smaller, there'll be more small and medium companies. And if you find the answer a bit confusing, it's because I am. I think it's an extremely difficult question, right? I think the world is so unpredictable, so this is the same. I think what will really drive learning is what we've seen also in the past, that it's driven by this huge engine of education. No, not it. What's it called? Leisure games, computer games for fun. That is like a huge motor driving innovation. So it'll kind of drip off on what becomes available for educational games or training games. And I think they'll move very fast into augmented reality and virtual reality. And then we have that, what you were mentioning, Paul, that you can have this safe space in the virtual world, which will create a counter movement that we need a place to learn things that are not in the safe, so we need people to be able to be very personal with each other and handle, conflicts and different things. So there will be definitely a room for the physical presence, non-digital game, teaching people to not look into their phone but to handle conflicts and stuff like that. So I think
that's why there's been such a resurgence in board games. Board games have grown enormously in the last number of years. If you go to Essensburg in Germany, it's now a multi-billion euro industry. And it's just board games. People sitting around the table talking to them.
It's only paper. Michael, what are your thoughts?
I guess I see a bit less optimistic future. I'm more of a scholarly practitioner, although I've done lots of research, but I've also been involved in the corporate sector and enterprise sector a great deal. And to me, I cannot see game-based learning achieving any significant niche until at least 60% of the current institutes of higher education go out of business. We are at the crux of a revolution where the younger generations will no longer tolerate the type of learning that many of us came up under. And because of that, universities, which we are already seeing, are in significant financial crisis. And they will go out of business. and they will go out of business quickly over the next decade. At least 60% of all the current institutes of higher education, especially the brick and mortar ones, will no longer exist. And because of that, an emergent set of academies, all based on a new language of games, an object-oriented language of games in which we can incorporate very significant meta pieces of stuff related to learning science into games, especially within that virtual reality area. And to me, that will mean an explosion of coaching and mentoring by human beings. Because as Paul described, we have a very significant disconnect. In the medieval period, when we had apprenticeships, you had a master, and the master created games for the apprentices to learn. That was how learning took place. We still have those apprenticeships in many of the vocational careers today. And because of those apprenticeships, we have a significant connection between those with experience and wisdom and those without experience and wisdom. And so with the downfall of significant institutes of higher education, the emergence of new academies, those academies will incorporate significant game-based learning elements, but will grow immensely in the capability to face-to-face build relationships based on individuals mentoring and coaching the new learners.
Very interesting, thought-provoking at least. I think there was a certain consensus in things. There was a little bit of disagreement as well.
Are we allowed to answer to each other? I was the first one, so I had the possibility to...
Yeah, like if you have any quick, anything
no.
quick in which to talk about, because we were very interested in this, but I'm sure the audience as well has other questions and we have other things. But please,
I just only have a remark because you said something, right? That researchers, we do analyze what you are designing. But the fact is that while you are designing one game, we are analyzing thousands, right? Mm-hmm. And there is something that I encounter a lot, is this feeling that if we design a game, we are going to engage players directly, no matter what, no matter the content. And I think the fact that we are saying now students are really distracted because they are using technologies, yes, but I remember myself being a student, not having the technologies, but not being focused at all on what the teacher is saying, right? The difference is now is that we can blame teachers technology. And we see them doing something, but it doesn't mean that. So from my perspective, it's about engagement, but if we are not being able to engage the students because they are not interested in learning what we are offering, games are not going to change that. So it's not only about rewarding systems, but about using gaming techniques to engage students in what we are trying to do. So that is mine.
Just not as in a comment to introduce, but just a reminder. I mean, of course, there are great games in education and non-education, and there's terrible games as well. So the fact that you have a game or you don't have a game doesn't mean it's going to be engaging or disengaging. It has to be a good game. There has to be sound research, game design, and so on. So I completely have to agree with that. You want to jump in as well, Sarah?
I mean, I could just let it go past, but I think maybe just to sort of talk to the point that George was talking about, which was...
Michael.
Sorry, Michael.
He wasn't going to get away with it, was he?
No, that wasn't it. But I do find it quite difficult to believe that all the universities will be gone in 5 years' time. It doesn't resonate that well with me. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I think the role of mentors will change, and I completely agree with that point. I think there will be more opportunities for mentoring, but I think that universities will adapt and they will evolve, and they need to adapt and evolve to the reality of where we are now. And I actually believe that more people will go to university actually in the future, and I think that more people from different ages will go to university. And I don't think it'll be seen as something so different from the mainstream. I think it'll become a much more fluid model of education, but that's probably over the 10-year to 15-year horizon rather than the next 5 years. It's true that there are issues financially with some universities, but I would say on the whole, that isn't, I don't think there's going to be sort of like a loss of 60% of universities in the next 5 years. I think that would be very unlikely, but I do welcome change and adaptation of universities to embrace more students. And I think through apprenticeships in particular, through games, through different approaches, we do need to make university education more available and more widely available to more people.
Beautiful. I love this controversy. So. this is fantastic for this. So I'd like to open up to questions. I know there's a question over here.
I'm just thinking, like, when you were talking, a lot of you were talking about the type of technology that we were going to use, but I'm starting to see a trend in a lot of things nowadays, maybe due because most people are better off than, at least the people I know are better off than the parents that they had, and so we have more space to worry about other types of things that they didn't worry before. And one of the biggest trends for 2020 I was seeing is people are already traveling a lot more, right? Millennials started traveling a lot more than their parents. And one of the big trends is doing experiences more than just visiting places. It's actually one of the largest markets in the next year, and more money is being put in. It's taking these experiences and putting it into people. But I see also games in education being that. You are more than learning, you're experiencing things, even in the virtual world. So like virtual reality, augmented reality, paper and pen, whatever it is, it's more about doing and experiencing things than just learning things and memorizing. And so do you think this is like a trend in a lot of other things that's going to happen? Is it something that we want more and more to do stuff than just to memorize things that we might need later?
Okay, so quick parentheses. I know probably you will all want to start. If you feel you have something to add, fantastic. If somebody's already said it, feel free. I mean, you don't feel you have to speak every single time. So I think always...
I agree, totally agree. The basis of experiences are emotions. And engagement evokes emotions. And what they're looking for is an emotional experience. An immersive experience is an emotional experience. Because you lose a sense of yourself. You're absorbed by where you are. And that is an opportunity for game design then and learning to create those evocative experiences that you remember years later. I remember games that I played as a kid. I remember experiences that I had as a kid because there's always an emotion slapped onto the memory. And I think it's a very powerful tool that we can use.
Would you like to add anything? Yeah?
Yeah, I think that is usually what happens is when you have a need and that need is covered, then you need something else, right? And a few years ago, we had the need for information because information was not available everywhere. Now information is everywhere, and we have like new needs, and this links to these experiences, and I think links to having extra emotions because we don't have to work that much to look for information because it's already there.
I'll take the opposite perspective just to get some fun. If somebody came to me as an HR director and said, hey, I want to provide these evocative experiences, I would just say, no way. I mean, what? So what are you going to use it for? What's it going to give me, right? So as companies, there's so much we could do. It's such a huge space of opportunity, and we really need to focus. And therefore, okay, I know learning and change, so I need some experiences, but exactly how are you going to make sure that it ends somewhere place that we can use, and how will it create more execution power or ability to implement stuff. So I definitely think you've got a trend there in the leisure and the life skills section. But in companies, it's like, our focus is just going really more and more narrow, and less, patience for these very open-ended learning experiences.
But is that not the conflict between the desire for quantitative information, which is what the company needs, and qualitative experience, which is what the person needs.
Yeah, that might be it.
We reframe things in the language that a person needs to hear. We just don't tell them about all that really cool qualitative stuff.
Yeah.
But even in the company, so I'm an engineer, and the company I work on is a lot about engineering, marketing, acquisition, and the way we oil the machine, we've been very happy with management because they usually try new things, and like I would say, we're actually in an agile environment. They are always trying to see what works or not, and we tried several agile tools, and some of them work really well, and a lot of them are almost kind of playful. Like I remember one was we were a lot of engineers, and engineers have big egos, and we love to talk, and so some of the meetings were long. These people would just like to listen to themselves talk, and this technology and that technology. You know, they started trying stuff, and they started doing the fishbowl technique. Like there's three people in the middle of that talk, and for you to talk, you need to be in the middle. You need to do that peer pressure thing. It's like, no, I want to talk, so I'm going to get up, and one will leave. And it was almost like the chair dance thing. So that kind of stuff, it's removing a little bit the stuff that we were doing in the past, that everyone's sitting down and doing this. And we're playing with it. We're doing stand-up meetings because we don't want to be sitting down too much. We're doing the fishbowl, we're doing even like the way we deal with giving timings for projects. We experimented with a lot of things, and a lot of them were like everyone on the table with tickets, doing things. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I think we're moving a lot into a hands-on thing. And then personally I'm learning a lot more about that kind of approach. And I'm seeing that approach being happening in a lot of other things in life. That's why I think there might be a connection.
Okay, great. I know there were more questions, so right here, have something.
It struck me that occasionally somebody mentioned state of flow. We also mentioned the lack of attention span that we see in people, young people. And then on the other hand, we know from the leisure games that there is now a medical diagnosis of being addicted to games. So on that scale of, say, losing attention span, and on the other hand, being very capable in terms of creating addicts, how can that ability to create an addiction be transformed in a positive way, maybe through a game-like experience, into turning people into a state of flow-like capability where you could say, okay, once they're in that flow state, they can absorb, they can learn, they can do fantastic things. So do you see a chance of utilizing games to create like that flow state through an addictive mechanism, maybe learned from the leisure games, but then applied in a more beneficial way to, say, unlimited learning capacity?
Okay.
It's like a combination of, can one utilize what is known to make addictive, but for a positive end?
So if I'm understanding correctly, your question is, how can we use maybe the ideas of flow to get people into that state of flow and almost unlimited capacity towards learning.
Right, and utilize what the leisure games do with young people. They create addictive.
So learning from games what they do great, as game designers do great.
Instead of whatever.
Instead of leisure and so on.
Games to create addiction, to create a willingness to learn.
Yes.
For different skill sets.
Yes. So okay, Paul seems to want to go first. The only one. So yeah.
So there's a story that a goldfish doesn't know what water is because it doesn't know what it's like not to be in water. So it doesn't know the difference. So that will happen when we reach a stage where the students don't know the difference between games and not playing games, where it's so embedded into the learning process that it's just all part of the same thing.
But we're not there yet.
We're a long way from that, because once we make a distinction between didactic classroom-based learning and playing games, there's a chasm between the two of those. And until the two of those merge to the point where you can't see the difference.
So is that difference going to
I think it goes to what Michael was saying.
the next 10 years?
It goes to what Michael was saying, that, you know, it might be worrying the thought that universities might start to disappear. But what's going to happen is universities are going to transform because the business demands are going to be for immersive, engaged, embedded learning practices. And they will become new business models for universities.
I think it's already
Or for
going.
everybody, yeah.
It's already going that way.
Yeah.
You know, there's already quite a lot more gamification now in the new
Yeah.
universities. You know, we're quite slow to take these things up, but I think it's already sort of
Yeah.
happening in that space.
There is a university in Denmark, I believe. We spoke about it last year, where the students, I think they're basically playing Dungeons and Dragons for the entire year. They take on a role, they take on an avatar, and they learn to play at third level through the entire year. And all of the learning experience are based around a fantasy theme model. And they immerse themselves in that world and they become part of that world and they don't know the difference. And they're learning and they're self-learning in that same process.
I do have a follow-up to this because we're talking about flow, which I think is a very interesting topic and it's very inspirational for game-based learning, gamification, and all these things. My question is, do you feel flow is in and of itself an objective in using game-based learning, gamification, and these strategies?
In some cases, definitely. It's built in.
In some cases, okay.
Because if you look at a lot of the game design models, they do utilise that concept really deeply in terms of how game design is done, and it's something that we've used in our models, and I'm sure there's many game designers here who use it very centrally. So I think that there's a real understanding about that. I think also in films you see it. You see it in TV. Game of Thrones and Peaky Blinders I talked about the other day. You do get lost in those environments, and it is very much that is flow. You use your sense of time and so on.
But the concept of flow is a tension between anxiety and boredom. Okay? You cannot sustain flow artificially for long periods of time. And as a result, even though many game designers attempt to create an immersive environment that will help trigger flow, if we look at the addictive side of the edutainment area for the younger folks, one of the problems we run into is addiction is semi-permanent. Flow is not. So what I'm feeling is that you're hoping that there is a way we can maintain flow for longer periods of time. I don't think we've got enough science at this stage to be able to do that because, as Fausto mentioned, there is this drive and motivation now for experience. If you're on a river rafting and you get into the rhythm and you get into the flow, sooner or later you're going to be on shore, okay? Because you lose yourself in it, as addicts lose themselves in whatever they're playing. So if experiences are beginning to become peak goals for many individuals, the experiences will create an environment for stimulated flow, to stimulate flow, but the individuals themselves will not be able to sustain it for long periods. Because it would be like being on adrenaline constantly. You can't. You burn yourself up. So I would back this up a bit in saying, why do we want flow to be part of experiences? I don't know. And that's what scares me at this stage, is we do have the addictive millennial generation and those younger. And yet we now understand how flow is this tension, but we haven't understood how you sustain that attention and why you want to. The only thing that would come to mind to me is a more esoteric goal. If you think in terms of the Eastern traditions of meditation and contemplation, that is flow, sustained for very long periods. But the goal is spiritual enlightenment. So if we apply this to workplaces or educational institutions, we have a whole different set of goals that don't match what traditionally took place with flow around those practices. So that's what would worry me.
Okay, any
Yeah,
addition or
I just want
subtraction?
to remark two things. One is when we are talking about addiction, what research shows is that individuals that get addicted to digital games or games in general is because they already have a psychological problem, right? Or they are needing something that is not being covered by other individuals. So they are feeling too lonely or they have deficit in something. So we should not be talking about addiction as something that we are aiming for within this. And something that is also really important is that play engage us usually because it's something that we choose, that is free. So even for the ones who are game players and the ones who play games every day, it's not each individual game that we are going to be really engaged with. I enjoy playing some games and I hate other games. So it's quite difficult to design a game for educational purposes that is going to be catering for all these individual preferences and needs. And also, if it does not cater to all individual preferences and needs, at some point you are going to say you have to play this game because it's part of our learning process. Then it's not free play anymore. There's no choice, there's no agency. So we are starting from not at that good position already. So this is I think it's one of the challenges. It's not that we cannot overcome that challenge, but it's there and it's something that we should acknowledge, I think.
There's a tension there as well.
Yeah, there's tension, yeah.
Paul?
The other thing about flow is that flow in itself is simply an experiential state. You have got to have periods of reflection in order to synthesize and embed the learning that you've experienced. Otherwise, it's just transient, it's just gone.
Mm-hmm.
So, for learning, the reflective period is incredibly important. You know, it's what we're doing here after the conference, effectively. We're reflecting on what we've talked about and done over the last few days. Because if we don't do that, we walk out of here and there's no memory of what's happened.
Well, that's because of the libations after.
That's a whole other story.
Just on this point.
Yes, please.
Michael, you have assumed, of course, that you can't achieve enlightenment in the workplace.
Okay.
No, I haven't assumed it, I just haven't.
There's time yet.
Questions regarding this or other topics? I know you had a question, but is there somebody else? Yes, Eric.
Going back to this point of the universities disappearing, or 60% of them, or not disappearing, but like not changing, the proposal to the reform of education is pretty old, from the 50s and 60s. But one of the pillars of education, especially K-12, it's alright, when you were showing for example, your paradigms of education, the new and the old, I wanted to ask, but of course, time. But here's the question. I didn't see testing and exams in there, but you did mention that, say, for example, data collection through the learning management system is present. So, but anyway, going back to the K-12 and all of these pillars of education, exams is one of them. And one of the problems I see is that games do amazing things, but the system does not allow them to replace exams. So, you have your class, you need some goal to deliver, people need to sit at math or geography for X amount of hours. The teacher, the institution may or may not choose to use games and whatever, but in the end they still have to do the same exam. And this is institutionalized and is run by the government law, so try to change this is very difficult. So the question then again is to get rid of this pillar, to get rid of the exams as they are, as they have been designed since the 50s and little has changed. How can we use this learning management system, which we know games are very good at collecting this data. They collect data from the moment we log in until the moment that we stop playing the game. So how do we get this to replace exams?
I would make a small reframe of whether is that what's desirable, is it possible, etc. But it's a great question. Like, how do we do it if that's possible, and if not possible, why? why not, or etc. Just so that we can have different perspectives as well. Yeah, Sarah, of course.
I think this is a really big piece of work because, if anyone who works in universities or schools, knows that, a lot of the problem actually is the academics themselves, and they're wedded to the exams, and it's actually really quite hard to get them to think differently. So I think part of it is about having a conversation with educators that's really based in the evidence and that looks at, if those sorts of assessments are not realistic assessments, is there pedagogic value there? So my argument is we need different types of assessments, and what I quite like about games is the fact that you can play a game and you can level up, and you don't have to have an exam. You basically get to the end of that level and you've actually gained those skills and you've understood those things. So whether that's in a role play situation or scenarios or combinations of that, and I think that's a really much more powerful approach to assessment than anything that I've seen so far. And I think that there are some exceptions. I think portfolio-based assessment can be very powerful as well. And we shouldn't say, throw out all the assessments. I think there's got to be a range. And I genuinely believe that we need to look at the way that we assess in games and really start to transfer that into education as soon as possible. And to do that, we have to have a conversation with the community because they're not just going to sort of go from that to that. I think we have to start showing what the arguments are, showing the evidence, showing the evidence base, and really thinking through how we're going to do this. But I think there are some, really significant changes, as we've talked about, today, that we need to do in order to get to that place. And I think we still need a lot more investment to go into serious games and educational games, because I think until we start having much more investment going in, it is going to be difficult to show the real power of what we can do.
And that performance-based testing system is much more inclusive of different learning styles, because the current exam-based system only rewards a certain demographic of learners who are very good at content accumulation and repetition.
Mm-hmm. And it's short-term memory. It's almost like the worst of education.
I think you're going to get a huge amount of support from the commercial world here, because the traditional industrial revolution or post-industrial revolution learning is sit still, don't talk to anybody else. We're going to fill your head full of facts that you can Google, okay? And then we're going to test you on them, which no one in commerce has ever asked for. Commerce wants collaboration. It wants people to think out of the box. It wants people to be able to research in an agile, effective way. And it wants results that combine the use of multiple brains and multiple perspectives to create that improvement cycle, such that you come up with a great answer. And I think there is, certainly in the United States, there is a huge backlash happening as we speak, and you can tell me whether this is true. I mean, it's starting, I feel it's starting to happen a bit in the UK, of the commercial world sort of backlashing against the tertiary education system, saying you're producing people that aren't fit for the workplace anymore. And so I don't think actually going back to Michael's point, if the paymasters of tertiary education are somewhat part of one of the big stakeholders is industry, then I think it's about changing that conversation, because in actual fact that will flow through into the adaptation of
I think we've had
do you have a question? Do you have a question? No?
I think we've had real challenges in higher education and across the education system, because we didn't know, what are we trying to produce? And I think in the past there's a really clear idea about, we're going to produce lawyers, we're going to produce doctors. Now we're in a state where, we need to produce, lots and lots of data scientists, and we don't really understand how to do that. So, from the educational point of view, we need you, industry, and other, areas to support us. And I think that's why the degree apprenticeships in the UK, and I'm sure they've got similar approaches in Germany and other countries as well, are so important, because you evolve that shape with industry, and the individual student has that chance to be working in industry. So it's quite, you can see the direction that we can go in there. But I think that there's some huge challenges for education in terms of what do we want to produce, because we still, I think we're beginning to get a clearer idea about what we're trying to produce. But it is different from what we've been producing traditionally. So I think it is, a really major step that we need to take. And I think the assessment piece is a really important part of that.
And I think education also resists this idea of producing just for industry. So I think it wants a broader aim of people that are healthy, happy, knowledgeable about many different things, and so that they can do something, the first career, then following career. So I think there's also a resistance in that sense.
And, the purists.
If we want to be a little bit provocative, I would say that...
Is it a follow-up question to this topic? Because there's also questions in the back, so I want to make sure. Yeah? You had a question?
Sorry.
Yes.
Just wanted to ask, is it because what is the future skill sets of what's needed in the work environment now is more caught rather than taught? So we think about things like agility, mindfulness, things like this. It's kind of, you have to catch it rather than being taught. So is it the reason why now the educational institutions are struggling to teach it because they're using a taught type of methodology as opposed to a caught type of methodology? I'm not saying just game-based learning as per se. So I mean, how do you teach methodology as in like in slides, in some things like agility where you've got to experience it? So is that maybe one of the reasons why education institutions are struggling to teach the new skill sets? And as much as you can see a lot of collaborative, industry collaborations, and the industries tell universities what they want, but universities are still unable to do it. So is it necessarily a methodology problem or is it beyond that?
I think we're working really closely. I mean, most universities, I don't know, I've worked in this is my 6th university actually, I've worked in a lot of universities, and we work really closely with industry to develop the courses that we produce. And I think with the apprenticeship model, even more that is the case. And most courses you'll have an industry board that will work with you. So we're definitely moving in the right direction, but there's always more that we can do, and we do need to transform some of these key elements which are holding us back.
So what I'm getting as well from Andrew, right? The question is whether as well, I mean that makes a lot of sense, but is there a methodology problem, and is that the methodology in and of itself one of the barriers that is encountered for that kind of, because your experience seems to be on the opposite direction, that there is a lot of collaboration already happening, but I'm not sure if that's the case in every other institution as well. Do you have any other views as well on this, the methodology again of experiencing versus lecturing, which I guess is a core of the question, if I'm correct?
Just agreement.
Well, people speak of 21st century skills, and you had it also in your model, and those skills are typical ones we need in the future: communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking. And these are skills that are very hard to teach. They have to be caught. You need to create an openness to receive it and learn it. It's very hard to deliver it from the stage, right? So I think as a lot of content is becoming available online, we have to say, okay, that's out there, it's handled there, and the universities and the businesses need to teach those higher skills, right? And that requires new learning methods. So definitely, I think that's an easy one.
It's like, I guess it's like teaching public speaking without speaking. It's kind of...
Yeah, you have to do it.
Difficult to say somehow.
Experiential and lots of feedback circles, etc.
Okay, that's great. So is there any other questions as well? Yeah? No? Fausto?
And as a follow-up to this,
okay.
We're seeing more and more education online. There's a lot of new courses you can take about a lot of subjects. Could this mean that universities could go more into an institution that can actually test the skills more than just dump information? Because you can get the information in a lot of places. Of course, it's great to have people who have a lot of experience to mediate that knowledge, but maybe something like games can be really useful to test that this whole knowledge that we have access to. Maybe people who are they don't have the money to go to university, but they can have the option of going to university and be tested to their knowledge that they got in a lot of other places.
So one of the transformations you're proposing or asking about is whether universities can also turn more into a certifier rather than just a content delivery.
You can use it more as an assessment tool because the actual knowledge is everywhere. And people can get it in a lot of other places.
Okay, I would add to that as well, if I may, the importance of content curation. Because I've gathered as well from what the panelists are saying, it's not just about having information, it's what information you want to look at and how to make sense of all that information. So please, the floor is yours, Michael.
One of the elements that you're touching upon, which is the reason that I'm seeing many younger folks demanding a higher experiential component, is that those universities generally offering online courses are forced by the structures mentioned, the regulatory structures, to be credentialed under particular regulatory rules and regulations which require exams. Exams are not experiences. And in experiential learning, we have a whole new suite of rubrics and assessment and evaluation tools that can significantly identify learning taking place. However, the accreditation agencies involved in those institutes of higher education are not changing fast enough, which brings me back to my initial disruptive proposal, which was 60% of these institutions, because the younger folks are demanding experiences, are not going to spend their time in a bloody lecture hall. They've got money. They're going to take the money where they can get the experiences. If it is new, emergent academies that are not accredited, that's where the money is going to flow, because they're going to get those experiences.
If I may say, this is already happening.
Yeah, I was going to say. Can I say, like, just
Please, Gillian.
like some of these experiences that you're talking about have already existed within universities, but over 20 years ago, I worked with a university with a design where they had all the information. It's for law students. They had all the information about the procedure that they needed to do in terms of going and sort of like filing their remit notice down at the court and going back and getting the information from the judge. And it was a very specific course that they had to do, but they had all the information, but it was a 90% fail rate because they just really didn't understand that experience and how to work together. Those sorts of courses have already been designed, but I think what's happening is that they've been designed by, within universities, but on that sort of niche level. And assessments, there's already assessment games that are designed specifically for particular courses in the academic world. I think that fundamentally, though, that it's really the ubiquitous nature. It's kind of like when Lars was talking this morning about these specific games that he's the custom design games that you're doing for very niche areas. But fundamentally, it's great to have a custom design game. But fundamentally, it's like, well, how do you do it so it's facilitating a huge number of people, and how do you make it simple enough so that you can, make it so an organisation can customise it easily? Because these things are not cheap to produce, as we know.
That brings me to a follow-up question as well about the customization versus mass production, and it's whether it's very related. Sorry, just let me finish the idea, so that of course you can provide your insights. And it's about the broadness of publics that you might have for a game, and how, for whether different generations or interests or whatever it may be, how does that impact the way that we are creating these learning games, and what is perhaps even, where do you think this should be shifting towards? Because you mentioned maybe having a broader audience. It should be a broader audience with diverse interests, or maybe more focused, smaller focused audiences where you're targeting. So I'd like to hear your insights precisely related to what you were mentioning before. When I say any and all of yours.
Can I just respond to the last question? I think what the situation you described about accessing information and learning is already happening. So MIT has put up all of their courses online.
Yeah.
You can train yourself in anything. The business model is you pay them to be certified. Okay?
Exactly.
So so in terms of the business model emerging, that's emerging. The other thing is that in business itself, the demands of HR are changing. So roles are being specified, and what's happening is there are students who, rather than going to an academic institution, are self-learning at the same time as taking internships. So they're becoming the self-apprenticed almost. And they are coming through an experience of working in Google or Facebook or whatever, where they're accrediting themselves to these modules of learning, and they're coming out with 3 years work experience at the same. So when they go to the next job, they're not like some student coming straight out of college who's just got a degree and not a clue how the business place works. They're actually coming out with life skills that they can take into the workplace that makes them more relevant to the workplace. And this is where business needs are going to start affecting how we learn.
Can I just give the example of the university where I work at the moment, actually, it's a year 1 year abroad, so it's a placement year for all of our students, so about 75% of our students already have a year in industry before they actually complete their degrees. And I think that's actually a really powerful model, and I think it's one that we will see more. I think with the apprenticeships as well, I think there's huge capability for how we can replicate these sorts of models as we go forward, whether that's something that people do themselves or whether that's done centrally through the university system.
Sure.
I think also the point about micro-credentialing, I think that that's also an opportunity as well as a threat potentially. But it does allow you to move around more, so you could then get credit from industry experience or from academic courses and so on, and build your own degree or build your own courses.
Would it also tie up with I think more and more people. So we went to the phase where if we take a course, a university course, we have a better job. Then we went through the doesn't matter. I'm not going to get the job anyway, so it doesn't seem to matter. And we might go, and I think it's a good idea no, university courses is a way of self-improvement. And that means that maybe I shouldn't take in Portugal I took a 5-year course, which is just like the most basic one was 5 years. 5 years is a lot of time. Yeah. And I might have wanted to choose better what those 5 years, what I was learning to cater to a certain goal that I had. And so doing that micro-assessment would be me catering myself, like how it's going to be my learning, and if it adapts to what I exactly want to do.
But if we think about the sort of future of learning, maybe think 20, 30 years forward, I think if we accelerate, if we can accelerate learning on the level that we think we can, people will be going to university much earlier, so maybe you might be seeing people go to university at 12. I think it's going to be quite a different model in the future. I do think, accelerated learning is going to give us some serious changes to what we see today, and I think there'll be benefits to that as well as challenges.
Great. Is there any further questions that you want to have? Yeah, please.
Just shifting a little bit the topic. I find that most of the time, or at least a lot of the time, we talk about educational games or serious games, about how to design them or how to use them in education and how to research them. We don't include the learners, so we don't involve them in this process. Or even teachers, at least in I know you were talking mostly about university, but at least in K-12 stages, which makes it way harder to then use them in schools. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least that's my perception here in Portugal. What do you think today is being done well in this area, and what should we be doing better to fill this gap? Or at least if you don't feel that there's a gap.
I'm guessing not just in Portugal, but in the experience of our panelists as well, which I think is a fantastic question. Like, what are the gaps between what we're observing and what you would probably wish for having? Is that right?
In North America, and I would include Canada there, the whole curriculum in K through 12 is driven by core curriculum that has been developed around exams and tests. And you can't get a charter unless you do that, which means to change the bureaucracies at the state or provincial level to put that on its head will take decades, because there's all kinds of vested interests now in maintaining core curriculum, because the industrial model is still to turn out people in high school with all the same learning. It's very much that Prussian model that we started with back in the 1800s. Line them up in rows, turn them out so that they can work in the factories. Well, we're going to have a hard time changing that, which means when they come to one of my classes, for example, as an undergraduate, and I start using games, I have the same issue that Diane had with the Koreans. It's kind of like, talk to me, lecture me, give me tests. I don't want to play games. They've spent K through 12 not doing that. And there does not appear to be a significant change in North America. I know in Finland and a number of Scandinavian countries, that is dramatically changing. So I can't see how we can appeal to them within a traditional structure to continue when actually the demand, because of the programming that's gone on by those individuals in K through 12, force them to want to ask for lectures and tests.
But I'm talking also even in the development of the game, for example.
I want to.
Yes, please.
Because my experience is completely different. I think I had the opportunity to teach in Spain, which has a quite traditional approach to teaching. It's changing, of course, but it's quite traditional still. And now I teach in the Netherlands, which is completely the opposite, right? We have in our university an innovation lab for education, and each faculty has an innovation hub. And basically we are receiving funding as teachers if we have ideas in how to innovate for our courses. So we get money to implement ideas in our courses, and we also have the possibility to get research assistants. So many of us are hiring students in order to get their input on how we should approach the courses in order to engage better with students. This Center for Innovation really encourages us to use technologies in class in order to interact with our students. But I've been experiencing this in different perspectives, and I've seen teachers like using the technology in different ways. Using the technology because they want to use the technology without having a specific goal. And what I've experienced is, in many cases, for example, I'm going to create an interactive video and then students can watch and interact with it before the lecture. They still do not have the motivation for that. They did still not engage in the course. And we experience that they do not interact with the video because we can see the numbers. While when we use that video in class and then after them individually interacting with the video can engage in a conversation with other students and then share their opinions and ideas, the results are completely different. So I think what we offer as university nowadays is we provide all the material and then here you come to have the interaction and the conversation and the debates with other students. That is something that you cannot have alone at home, and this is what we offer as university. And it's not mandatory for us to use exams, but personally, when I use exams, I do not use them to test if they have memorized the content, more also to test if they understood the content. So questions are phrased in order for them to show they are able to establish links between concepts and then show how they could be applied in real life. So I think even if we have to use exams, it's the way we design the exams that makes a difference.
And how difficult it is as well to grade them and where that balance between the load that you have as a professor and how much you can achieve and you can do in that time. Any more inputs? I think this is our last question. Do you have any more inputs before we close up? Well, thank you very much to all of you, the panelists. Thank you for a fantastic audience as well with a great intervention. thanks John and the Business Excellence Institute for getting this together. So.
Thank you very much.